And as South African schools grapple with a worrying rise in bullying as well as violence among learners, the Thrive Initiative, which is an NPO, has now stepped up and started training its first cohort of 10 youth facilitators from Nyanga to drive and also pioneer a new somatically based intervention for schools as well as communities within the Cape Peninsula. Now, the training to facilitate interactive sessions, teaching participants new skills to manage stress, build empathy, and resolve conflict in a whole new constructive way. And their work fully extends beyond addressing bullying and tackles related issues such as gender-based violence, relationship difficulties, community pressure, as well as accountability and leadership. Well, let's now welcome Mr. Brian Siegel, who's the founder of the Thrive Initiative. Brian, I'm deeply honored, so welcome. Wow, thank you for this great initiative. I know I mentioned a few of your outputs within my intro, but please, in your own words, take us through this initiative as well as its main objectives, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. I was deeply moved by the gender-based violence clip beforehand. And what I'm wanting to explain is that very often we've got logic and rationality. And physiologically, what happens is when we are triggered, that is our logical brain, our thinking brain. And when we trigger it loses logic. And so that's really how we're needing to deal with gender-based violence, is by saying, how do we take the pressure away? Because when men sadly or women are sad in that triggered state, they lose their logic. How many times have we made logical agreements that we can't keep? And so that's really what the Thrive Initiative is about. It's about how do we begin to understand our emotions in a way that we don't become triggered. And that we don't act out of rage and with regret. And that's, yes, thank you.
You know, Brian, so I've long been of the view that in order to actually address the grassroots as well as cause of these bullying as well as other forms of abusive behavior, you actually need to understand what prevailing and mitigating circumstances were there. Some of these kids or even adults come from different social backgrounds that often cause them to act out in these violent ways. Yes. So how has this specialized approach actually aided now in you seeing a difference among bullying incidents or even violence among schools within this initiative?
So that was why we launched this initiative from Nyanga. Nyanga is one of the townships within Cape Town. It's poverty-stricken. It is violent. It is something that, as a white person, you can't understand what goes on in that. And so for us, it is about how do we take these issues, and so we've trained these 10 Thrive initiators to deal with emotional issues so that we can begin to express our emotions differently. We can begin to express our emotions from a more talking way and talk through them as opposed to acting them out. It's also about what we call about releasing of trauma, because very often with a bully, it is their own childhood trauma that creates a bully. It is our approach that says that a bully has been bullied, and that is why he becomes a bully. Now, I'm not saying that as a justification. I'm saying that as a deep understanding, because if we can understand the problem, and if we can teach men or women to speak differently, to talk differently, to engage differently, then we can begin to reduce the scourge of bullying and gender-based violence. Because the more I shout at you, the more I reprimand you, the more I make you more constipated, and at some level, the more we create bullying and gender-based violence because we don't have that outlet of expressing ourselves.
Absolutely. You know, Brian, talk to us about what actually takes place during this training. We understand that you're teaching participants new skills to manage stress, build empathy, and resolve conflict in a completely different way. How do you go about doing this and also ensuring that whatever they've learned, of course, they take it out to the rest of their peers?
So, first of all, we understand that communication, 20% of my communication is words. The other 80% is my body language. So if I was to talk to you like this and saying it's really nice to be here, you can see how it's a very different projection. And so what we do is we teach what we call somatic skills, which is the skills of understanding what's happening inside our body. So that when we are training or when we are engaging within the community, we are feeling what's happening inside of their body, we're feeling their tension, we are understanding them and giving them skills to release that tension that they hold. Because only once we release that tension that we hold can we really begin to speak about it. If you think about having a fight with your partner, at that particular moment of reactivity, not much is achieved. And there's shouting and battling of each other. But how do we release that tension safely? And so that is what these 10 initiators are doing. They've been sponsored for the next 6 months to work in the townships. So we're trying to get youth involved. We're trying to organize youth programs around youth. We're taking it into schools so that we can teach a new way of communication. A more soft, gentle.
And maybe yes, Brian, a very quick one as well. Maybe with, of course, I know you mentioned a little bit in regards to this aspect with the Cape Peninsula as well, having serious gang challenges where young kids are often part of gangs at an early age. How have you identified the communities most in need of these interventions, like in Nyanga, for example, where you have started? And do you also have plans to have a bigger reach within the Cape region, or even make this as a pilot for others to follow in other affected schools or even in affected areas right across the country?
So sadly, let me turn the question around. What areas are not affected by gender-based violence? Sadly, the majority of South Africa is affected by gender-based violence, is affected by bullying. And so my question is saying that there might be a few places that are not. And so our dream is to create these independent spinning teams that work throughout South Africa, that have been trained to be able to deal with it somatically, not intellectually, because now I'm talking to you intellectually and we can make sense of it. But when you're triggered, how do you have those teams? How do you have that ability to regulate yourself to get out of your trigger? And so, yes, our dream is to have it in every single township within South Africa.
Wow, Brian, we're going to leave it there. That is a great initiative. Best of luck with your expansion plans. That is Mr. Brian Siegel is the founder of the Thrive Initiative.